In the introduction to Wiseblood Books and Well-Read Mom's new edition of Pinocchio, we hear the still resonating words of the late Italian Cardinal Giacomo Biffi. Quote, "I know the exact date of my first encounter with Pinocchio, December 7, 1935. My father bought it for me at the St. Ambrose Fair when I was 7 years old," close quote. Initially, Cardinal Biffi admitted that his relationship with Pinocchio was a bit volatile, as its lessons seemed a tad too moralistic for his tastes. Until one day, the Cardinal said, he saw the light. Quote, "I discovered that the story contained an announcement. The book, rather than suggesting rules of conduct, revealed the true nature of the universe. Under the veneer of the fairy tale, a clear and well-defined doctrine shines through, which the humble people of this world have always known and loved. Beneath the current of narrated events, I glimpse the highest and most common, most suggestive and most satisfying, richest and simplest, most whimsical and logical vision of things that has ever been offered to the human mind. Pinocchio might also have been called on Catholic orthodoxy. This is the hypothesis that won me over bit by bit," close quote. Marcie Stokman and Colleen Hutt on Wiseblood Books and Well-Read Mom's edition of Pinocchio Now. My name is Tod Worner, and this is the Evangelization Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. Marcie Stokman is the founder and president of Well-Read Mom. Marcie and her husband Peter have 7 children and 19 grandchildren and reside in northern Minnesota. She writes and speaks to share the power of reading, faith, and friendship. Colleen Hutt graduated from the University of Notre Dame's Liberal Studies program. She's worked as a DRE in Venice, Florida, and as a pastoral associate for adult formation in Whitefish Bay and Fox Point, Wisconsin. She and her husband Colin have 5 children and 1 grandchild. Currently, Colleen serves as a director of literary evangelization for Well-Read Mom. She is passionate about growing in her faith, revitalizing culture, and approaching the struggles of modern life from the heart of the church. Together, Marcie and Colleen wrote The Well-Read Life, released in fall of 2024 with Ave Maria Press. Marcie and Colleen, welcome.
Great to be here.
Thanks so much, Tod, for having us.
Segment 1. What is old is new. In the foreword to Wiseblood Books, Well-Read Mom's edition of Pinocchio, Colleen Hutt writes, quote, "Carlo Collodi's The Adventure of Pinocchio has fascinated readers for over 140 years. Countless volumes have been written about Pinocchio, each interpreting the story according to contemporary narrative trends and ideologies. In addition to the literary criticism on Pinocchio, there have been nearly 50 different film adaptations of the story, with 3 new versions released in 2022 alone," close quote. So, Marcie and Colleen, let's begin with this question that many people might ask, which I was asking myself. Why has the story of Pinocchio captured so many imaginations for nearly 1.5 centuries, and how can something so old strike so many of us as so new?
Well, I'll start and then Colleen can go further into this. But for me, I didn't really know the real story of Pinocchio. You know, I knew maybe a children's version that was maybe a Disney version, or another one about his nose growing when he lies. But when we had a foreign exchange student from Italy, and we were able to visit her at one point, and I was in Matilda's home checking my email in this back room, and I looked up on this bookshelf full of books, and there was Pinocchio. And it said, "With reflections by Franco Nembrini." So I find books more interesting than emails. So I pulled it off the shelf, and it happened to be it was a little book. It happened to be in English. It was translated for this particular conference, and it was Pinocchio at Work. But they gifted this book to me. I was fascinated by it because it was the actual original story of Pinocchio with notes by Franco Nembrini. And so I read it on the airplane all the way home. I felt like the Lord had put this book in my hands. I mean, they had gifted it to me, but also the Lord had gifted it to me because it was showing me not just the journey of a wooden puppet, but actually the journey of my own life, the human journey, which is the journey back to the Father.
Fantastic. Colleen, how about you?
Yeah, I think when you talk about that, this story has captivated readers for generations. Why is this? Pinocchio is a story that is so rich and so simple at the same time. It's like a lot of Jesus's parables, actually. They're so simple, but they're so profound. They can be meditated on for so long. And there was an image that I think it's in The Risk of Education by Giussani, where he talks about parents fill a backpack and with all the things of the tradition, they put it on the child's backpack over the years. And it's the child's job, eventually as they get older to turn the backpack around instead of just chucking it out the window, to take out what's there, look at it anew, and make sense of it for themselves. And I think this is what Pinocchio allows us to do. Every generation has to kind of understand the tradition anew. I think this is what Word on Fire's mission is all about, and why it's so desperately needed, because the structures of our society today are such that we don't have the right things in place to help us understand the tradition with other people. And so around us, supporting us, this community, that's why Well-Read Mom exists, is to help provide a way into these eternal stories. And I am captivated by this story so much. I heard recently that there's a possibility of Ron Howard doing another production of it. And my poor husband, in the writing of this introduction, I think we saw probably 12 different movie versions of Pinocchio.
Yeah.
And one in particular was fascinating, Guillermo del Toro's interpretation of Pinocchio. And he said in an interview, and I mentioned this in the introduction, this is a quote from him, quote, "I really wanted to make a disobedient Pinocchio and make disobedience a virtue. I wanted everyone to change but him." And I just thought this was so fascinating, because Nembrini unlocks for us in our modern age what obedience really is. On page 92, he says, obedience means recognizing the truth. And this is what we don't see today. We think of obedience as kind of like a thumb down, like pinning the person down into the ground, and submission to a will that you don't know is good. Well, that's not what obedience is. Obedience is recognizing the truth and responding to the truth. So I think this version of Pinocchio is so important for today, because we need to rediscover what it means to obey. We need to rediscover what it means to be a creature of a creator. We need to rediscover the beauty of seeking the good. And this isn't in a moralistic sense. Nembrini really spells this out for us when he talks about Pinocchio being per bene, the fairy, the blue fairy says you have to be a good boy. And the translation is a little odd, because at first it seems kind of like moralistic. What does it mean to be a good boy? And Nembrini flushes this out for us. He says per bene is also per il bene, to seek the good. And that's really what it is, this deeper sense of what's goodness, not just do this, don't do that, but respond in obedience to the truth that you were created good.
Yeah, that's so good. And it makes me think, we're going to get into this on their third segment on the theology of Pinocchio, but it reminds me of St. John Paul II's comment, freedom is, I'm going to probably butcher the quote, but the freedom isn't the ability to do what you want, but the right to do what you ought. And I remember also a conversation I had recently with Patrick Deneen, who's talking about the classical definition of liberty and the modern definition of liberty. The classical definition was there was a discipline to arrive at virtue. So there was a proper, if you will, self-restraints to become virtuous and to arrive at that higher place, to seek the good. Whereas the modern definition is you should have no restraints, no shackles. At the end of the day, do it. If it feels good, do it, which leads people to decadence. And if not, it leads them to nihilism. And it's interesting because there is a thread of this boy just serving his appetites again and again throughout this book that Nembrini is saying, watch and see, watch and see. And obviously we do watch and see. And what unfolds are oftentimes horrific things. I mean, this is not a story. This is not a overly gratuitously violent story, but there are dark things that happen in this, which I think goes along with all the Grimm's types of fairy tales and so on. So we're going to go more into this as well. I wanted to ask you, let's talk about the original author. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Is it Collodi? Is that Collodi?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Tell me, what do we know what prompted him to write this story, Pinocchio?
Colleen, go ahead.
Sure. Well, he's a very interesting man. And, he started out having religious, I think his mother was very religious. And he grew up in the church, a time of Italy that was not only culturally Catholic, but it was just infused in the daily life. He wrote this story of Pinocchio in 1881. But before that, he grew up into the church, and then he became enamored with the Risorgimento movement in Italy, the reunification movement in Italy, and he got very into politics. And when that happened, in Italy, I think politics and religion are a whole podcast unto itself, right? Yeah. So Carlo Collodi kind of became, I would say, entranced with the idea that politics could reform society. I think this was a very popular idea at this time. And maybe the church was out of step or out of date, and that politics was the new world order that could kind of change. But what ended up happening was Italy became reunited. King Emmanuel II crowned himself king, and they were kind of at the same place that they've always been. Politics didn't solve the deep questions of the heart, and it disappointed him in the end. And I think he saw that the faith and the belief he had in politics to be his sole answer to the questions of his heart left him disappointed and wanting. And so he renounced politics and he went into writing stories and stories for children. And that's what's so fascinating about Pinocchio is this is the first story that he wrote.
Wow.
And he actually wrote it with the story ending with Pinocchio dying, hanging from a cross, hanging from a tree, not a cross, from the tree. And the children of Italy revolted and forced him to bring their hero back to life. And he had to respond to that cry of the children. He had to respond to what they wanted. They wanted their hero resurrected. And I think it was really, I believe, as I think Franco Nembrini does and Cardinal Biffi does, that Collodi was working out his Catholicism through the writing of this book. Yeah. Do we know that? Can I prove it? The proof is in his words. The proof is in actually what happens in the book. That he has an imagination that's so deeply formed by the church, he can't escape it. What other human being comes back to life?
Yeah.
Jesus. His imagination is so informed by this. He writes from this deep place of faith, even though I don't think he totally realized it at the time. But I would like to believe in the process of writing this, that he actually comes to see this deep in his heart.
This is a magnificent, and we're part of this story, and we're going to get into this a little bit when we move to our next segment shortly, about the way he had it ending. It was stunning to me to discover that, because I thought, what an awful ending to a children's story. It was brutal, and yet, like you said, the children were having none of it. They're like, no way. So again, back to the structure of the book. Then, so your edition, as we know, is a generous 36 chapters, with each chapter followed by the commentary by this thoughtful Italian writer, teacher, and Dante expert, Franco Nembrini. Can you tell us more about who Franco Nembrini is and how you decided to not just reproduce the story of Pinocchio, but to bring back the narrative unfolding, almost exegesis of each chapter by this bright and thoughtful man?
Well, I first encountered Franco Nembrini when Well-Read Mom read Dante several years back. And I found some reflections by him. I have a son who's a priest, actually, in Rome, in the Fraternity of St. Charles Borromeo. And Franco's brother is also a priest. Anyway, my son knew of him and introduced me to him, and I was able to interview him via translator on Dante.
Wow.
And so when I was at Matilda's house in Italy and saw Pinocchio with notes by Franco Nembrini, I made the connection. Oh, that's the Dante teacher, scholar. He's not really a scholar. He's a high school teacher, a father of four, and he's such a profoundly human person that you just fall in love with him. And so his notes somehow open up. Like if it weren't for his notes, so we have each of the 36 chapters followed by these two little crickets on the side. And after the crickets are Nembrini's commentary. And honestly, Todd, when I found this book and read it on the airplane, I didn't stop there. I took it with me to the Adoration Chapel. I put it by my bedside at night because it's something you can read like during Lent, or last time I was at Colleen's house, she was reading it to her high school son, and her older son also hangs around and listens. It's a story we can read out loud and discuss. I have friends who are teachers who are using it in their theology classes, because not only is it about this human story, but he's telling it in a way that is so different from, just memorizing Bible verses or catechism, which is also important. But we have to have our imaginations awakened and sort of educated to the Christian concept of life, rather than ideological conceptions of life like Colleen was talking about with some of these editions of Pinocchio coming out that take people further away from the truth. We want to take back our stories. And I think Cardinal Biffi, when he did his seminary work, or when he was a seminarian, he wrote a thesis about Pinocchio and how it really was the Christian story, the human story of the journey back to the Father. And Nembrini found this. He came across it and he started using it with his high school theology students in Italy, chapter by chapter, week by week. It was pretty convenient to take up the whole year. And he said he saw these students come alive because they recognized themselves. They recognized their huge desire for everything in life, and not wanting that to be squelched. Yeah. And boy, this book has helped my life. That's when I find a book and I say to myself, this is helping me. Yeah. This is telling me something about who I am and awaken me. It's bringing about a deeper conversion because it's helping me fix my eyes on the most important thing, what I'm doing here. And one more story, and then I'll let Colleen continue. But we use this book for Lent in Well-Read Mom. We're in Year of the Father. So we're reading books about experiences with fathers, our earthly father, our all kinds of fathers in the literature we're reading this year. But one day my daughter was home and it was a weekend, and she said, "Mom, I want to go to confession today. It was Saturday afternoon. Please, I've got to go to confession. I said, well, she seemed kind of urgent about it. And there was a pressing need. So I said, well, I'll go with you, And so we drive over to church and we're walking into the church. And I said, this silly question. It was really, I'm thinking, why am I asking this? I said, Margaret, why do you go to confession? Why do you go to confession? I asked my daughter, and I'm expecting her to say, to have my sins forgiven. And instead she says something that shocks me and was a huge correction. She said, I go to remember that I have a father.
Wow.
And it absolutely has changed me because I often live this moralism with the faith, like, oh, I did this wrong. And I go to a place of shame. And I go to confession sort of to write the books, to get it right.
Yeah.
And instead, God is calling me actually saying, no, don't. It's not that kind of shame. It's like, I don't want you to miss your life. I don't want you to miss the truth of who you are. Come back to me. I love you. And so Pinocchio wakes us up to this journey that we're really on.
What a wonderful story. What a wonderful moment with you and your daughter. I mean, and talk about the spiritual awakening for you in that respect, from the mouths of babes, if you will. Colleen, would you add anything, any thoughts?
Yeah, only that, Franco Nembrini is a teacher. He started out teaching in high school, but he also served as the president of the Educational Works in Italy from 1999 to 2006. And since October of 2018, he's been a member of the Vatican Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life. So, he is recognized as being by the church as having a unique gift, I think, to help us live our family life in a deep way and to be able to educate our minds and our hearts.
Yeah.
And he has really served the church that way. And his reflections are just so human. They're not written from a super high theological, with vocabulary that everyday people wouldn't understand. No, he wants this story to be lived in the hearts and minds of every person can understand this story. And this is what our great books, are all about. This section that we're talking about, what is old is new.
Yeah.
These books were not written for academics. They were written for people to help them live their lives and to provide images that they could grasp and hold on to that shape them. And that's what Franco Nembrini sees in this story is he says, wait a second, before you just read through it and kind of don't take the time to notice these particular details, let me flesh them out for you.
Yeah.
And the way that he does it is just brilliant.
I think you're so right about that, Colleen, because this book strikes me as almost an exercise in spiritual direction. You're reading this imaginative literature, and I think about the notion of, like you've both said, Christ's parables. It's one thing to say love your neighbor as yourself; it's another to tell the story of the Good Samaritan. And as we also know, Flannery O'Connor once said, "I tell a story because a statement would be inadequate." So the story is captivating, but then to have this gentle voice after each chapter, whether it's a chapter of reconciliation or a chapter of waywardness. Nembrini seems to really be reflecting on where Pinocchio is, but where are we? Where are our souls when we have moments like this in our lives? And it's deeply, it's an embrace. It's a very embracing book in that respect. Segment 2, The Adventures of Pinocchio. In the opening chapter of Pinocchio, we read, quote, "There was once upon a time, a king," my little readers will instantly exclaim. "No, children, you were wrong. There was once upon a time a piece of wood." Now, when I first read this, I started laughing because I thought that is not a great start to a riveting. They're all looking for the king. The children are looking for the majesty and the glory and the adventure, and they're given kind of a piece of wood. So, can you guys tell us? And I want to make something very clear. This story is unlike any true version of Pinocchio I've ever known, because again, like I think Marcie, you said at the very beginning, our popular understanding of Pinocchio is, there he is, there's Stromboli and the puppeteer and then there's the fox and the cat, but then it's all about his nose growing and the missing Geppetto. There's so many other parts of this adventure that seem almost recognizable, and yet it totally enriches the story. So we're starting without a king. We're starting with a piece of wood. Can you guys just kind of unfold to us, how does the story begin?
Well, Colleen is our Pinocchio expert here, but I will just start with, and then Colleen, you fill in. But there's a character in the very beginning called Master Cherry, and then there's Geppetto, and Nembrini helps us understand these two different characters and two different worldviews, two different takes on reality, two different takes on a piece of wood in front of them. And Master Cherry's take on the piece of wood is, I'm going to take this and make a table leg out of it or whatever. And Geppetto, when he receives the piece of wood, he sees this wooden puppet, which will become a boy. And it's one version is saying, I control reality like Master Cherry.
Yeah.
I'm in charge. I'm the boss. I'm in charge of my life. I create what I want. It's a relate. And the other one is the givenness of reality. And that life is gift. And these two initial chapters with Master Cherry and then being introduced to Geppetto, who is Geppetto in Italian is Joseph. So there are many references to our Christian story throughout this book, but Geppetto is a true father, and Master Cherry wants to manipulate reality, and we have these two different worldviews, and it strikes me so much because as a committed Christian, like I love the Lord, and yet I often live this other version of reality as if I don't have a father. And I'm in control and in charge and independent and individualistic, or individualism dominates in our culture.
Yeah.
Like we're separated from this true, we live like orphans often.
Yeah.
And so, Colleen, do you want to say more about?
Yeah, the piece of wood. It's what's before you. Collodi surprises us by starting his stories in such an ordinary way. Just like our stories begin with our birth and what is given to us in such an ordinary way. We want it to be, tell us a story about a king. Tell us a story about these great adventures. The trick is that our story is that great adventure. We are the kings, but we don't know it yet. Yeah. And Nembrini really flushes us out in that first chapter. He said, Collodi's opening with the piece of what is wonderful for this reason. Reality comes first. What comes first are the questions about the things we see, about our lives. This is where a true religious sense creeps in little by little and must be educated. A religious sense that is the question of God and existence. So what he's saying is basically, gosh, this ordinary thing is going to become quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's this sacramentality in the world where these ordinary things become infused with something. They become real. They become alive.
Yeah.
Through truth, through obedience, through loving the Father, through right relation, through pain, through the corrective of suffering, we become something extraordinary. And that's what he's showing.
It reminds me a little bit of the Chesterton story about the man who forgot who he was, and the man walks around town and doesn't know who he is. He's oblivious to it, and he says it's a story of amnesia, and it's a lark and so on. But he ends by saying that's what's become of us, that we have forgotten our identities as children of God. And again, the thread of Pinocchio as it's unfolded in your edition and as it's kind of explained by Nembrini, it seems, is the notion that we fight against our identity as children of God and the need to live up to the dignity that we have as children of God, and the constant waywardness that is then answered by a God who forever extends himself to us again and again and again. I want to say this when I'm reading this. I'm sitting here and my daughters are looking. What are you reading? You're reading Pinocchio? And I'm like, not now. I'm reading. No, I'm kidding. But I was explaining this, and they're like, really? Wow, I don't remember that. And I'm like, no, nor did I. This is the original story, which is why everybody should read this. I didn't like him. I mean, I'm reading this and I'm like, I do not like Pinocchio. I mean, he's a little, he's a jerk, and he's a little brat. He's a little brat. And again, then I'm like, well, that kind of strikes close to home when it looks at my relationship with God. I guess I can be that little brat as well. I want to ask you, as he's unfolding in the life of Geppetto, who is this, as Marcie, you said, is this loving father that's present, that's constantly giving, and is also kind of bereft of resources. He's poor and so on. I want to focus in on the spelling book. Tell me about what the spelling book means in the eyes of Geppetto. What are the consequences of affording this spelling book for Pinocchio, and what becomes of the spelling book?
Well, first, can I just respond to what you were saying about Pinocchio being a little brat?
Yes.
Because it's true. And we look back to our own story of the fall, right? Someone once described it to me like this, and for whatever reason, this modern description of the fall really has stuck with me. It's like you're in Manhattan, and God says, all of New York is yours. Every light is on, every building, except on that one building way over there on the 14th floor, down the hallway. Just don't turn off that light.
Guess where I'm going.
Like, right? That's what the Garden of Eden was like.
Yeah.
And that's what Geppetto, I'm going to give you this life. We're going to have this life together. I'm going to animate you. You're going to live with me, and it's going to be beautiful. And Pinocchio immediately runs away. Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
So to that point, I think it makes no sense, right? But on the point of the spelling book, we see over and over again Geppetto wanting to educate Pinocchio. And that's what the spelling book is. Nembrini says this about it on page 83. The path towards humanization starts to take shape with the clothes that he gives him, but it closely followed by Geppetto's great gift to Pinocchio. This is the spelling book, the tool that can truly make him capable of self-fulfillment. The book is clearly a metaphor for reason, that extra something that God gave to man and not to beasts. And I said before, we can call it the soul, the spirit, desire. Perhaps the Bible would use the word heart. And all of this is reason. Pinocchio starts looking to use reason. Reason is the human capacity to look at things as they are, to face reality for what it is, and to enter into correct relationship with it. Reason is the capacity to see things for what they are. That is, to make judgments, to build experience, to compare, to choose, and decide in relation to reality.
Wow.
And I would add there
that,
before a few things happened before Pinocchio receives, before he gets the spelling book,
Yeah.
he's been disobedient. He's run away, he's done his own thing. And now he's had a bit of reconciliation with his father, and he realizes he's going to go to school. But he needs a spelling book. So Geppetto sells his coat and buys this spelling book for him. For me, the spelling book is like, there is a work to do on our part. There is an effort.
Mm-hmm.
We need to you don't just sit around and become a saint.
Yeah.
I mean, grace is real for us. It's very real. We live by grace through Christ. But there's a work to it. There's putting ourselves in the places we need to be. There's saying yes to certain things and no to certain things. And there's a discipline, a sacrifice involved in it. There's suffering involved in it.
Yeah.
And we often want to avoid the work.
Mm-hmm.
And the spelling book to me, exemplifies, okay, roll up your sleeves and embrace the work.
And can I just say, too, that this is a big mirror to us today. I think this lesson of Pinocchio, selling his book to go to a puppet show. What do we trade our reason for today?
Yeah.
Look at our culture of entertainment, the phone, the constant distractions, the meaningless entertainment sometimes that we allow ourselves to be distracted by distraction from distraction, as T.S. Eliot says, right? We're distracted from our own life. We trade our reason. We willingly relinquish it for nothing.
Yeah.
For nothing. So we need to take back our reason. We need to kind of commandeer our senses towards reality in a deeper way, so that we're not just following one thing here and one thing here and the next shiny thing that pops up on my phone and the next notification, the next movie. And no, we're missing our life when we do that, because we're allowing our appetites for what? Yeah. Pleasure, ease. This is what everyone struggles with, right? I mean, I look at it, in my own kids, right? The influencers today. Mm-hmm. Oh, did you know I made $1 million on Instagram by doing this? It's like Pinocchio.
Yeah.
You're going to go bury your gold. Bury your gold, because you want to get rich quick, and you think that it's not going to come with any work. I mean, does that happen? Of course, yeah, it happens for a few people, but are they really the lucky ones? Are they really the lucky ones?
Right. It's amazing because the story it's a sweeping story that is biblical in its own right. Because again, if you look at so many of the figures in the Bible, while there are many that are faithful, there even some of the great faithful saints, as we know, prove to be wayward again and again and again. I mean, this is, again, I have little hair in my head, but what hair I had, I pulled out at certain moments in this book, because I'm like, Pinocchio, no, that's the wrong way. It's the wrong way. And only because of time, we can't go too deep into it. But there's the story of when he's engaged with the fire eater, the showman. There's the encounter with the fox and the cat. There's when Pinocchio finds himself in the patch and taking, I don't know if it was what it was that he was eating, but he was eating some vegetables that weren't his, and he gets captured and employed as a watchdog. And one time he's imprisoned as an innocent prisoner, and so on. He just constantly either stumbles into trouble or he runs headlong into it. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to, because so many of these characters are rich and are recurrent throughout this theme, that are sort of part of the causes of Pinocchio's headaches, but of course, Pinocchio is the cause of his own headaches so much of the time. I did want to focus in on two figures that come again and again as a breath of fresh air, a breath of warning, a breath of solace outside of Geppetto, and those are the cricket and the blue-haired fairy. So can you tell about who are these two figures? And I know the cricket kind of manifests in different ways, one time a firefly and so on. Who are the cricket, and who does Nembrini think the cricket and the blue-haired fairy are emblematic of?
Oh, great question. I mean, I don't want to reduce it to, it means this exactly.
A simple
but,
symbol, or yeah.
Right. It's a symbol. The cricket, for sure, is Pinocchio's heart, his conscience, his voice of reason that God has given him that remains. And he tries to destroy it numerous times. I mean, he throws things at it. He tries to deaden it, but yet it remains, and it plagues him, and it haunts him, and it follows him, and it's always kind of telling him, hey, you can change your life. You can change your life. And it can begin again now. And pointing him to the truth of what freedom is. Like, choose the good, Pinocchio, choose the good. And this concept of conscience implanted by God in our hearts to help us is beautiful. I just was teaching RCIA at our parish this last week, and I had to describe the moral life. That was the topic I was given, and I wish I could have just read Pinocchio to them. I mean, I wish I could have sat down and said, you have to think like the church when you're making decisions. But what is it about conscience? We have to obey conscience, the church teaches us, but we also have to inform it. And the informing of conscience happens through the church, which is the blue fairy. The way in which we're educated happens through this incarnational presence in our life that is given to us through the church. And I love actually how Pinocchio first encounters the blue fairy. He's in the woods. He's in pursuit. He's running. He tries to find this safe haven. And this is on page 136. The assassins are pursuing him, and they're about to hang him from the oak tree. And he's being chased, and he's knocking at the door of this house that he finds in the wood. And everything is dead here. I'm dead. Everything is dead. And he ends up getting hung on this oak tree. And the fairy comes to him, the beautiful child, and takes him down off the tree. And then the fairy actually changes from this child to this fairy person. So I don't want to give too much joy away in reading and discovering what this is, but there's something about the child becoming Mary, this relationship between the handing over of the child to the mother of the church. This is the first time where a woman comes into the story, which is beautiful. At first, just like the Old Testament, the book is dominated by the action of men, of the Father and the Son. But this is where the woman enters, the church, the heart, and it helps inform his conscience. It's a place of refuge for him. It's a place of new life for him. Nembrini brings out this beautiful quote by John Paul II, where he says that a woman is to be found at the center of the salvific event. And that's what the blue fairy is.
Wow. She
is this presence at the center of his salvation.
Todd, I would also add that, this cosmic tree that Pinocchio dies on, it's just so symbolic of the death and resurrection of Christ. And when Collodi wrote his first version of Pinocchio, it was in installments, probably for the newspaper, right? So these children were reading it every week. And so by the end of the 8th week, I believe, when he dies, they're really into this story. They like this naughty little puppet boy. And so, the heart demands redemption.
Yeah.
The heart demands to live forever. I mean, we know it within us. No one wants to die.
Yeah.
we don't want relationships to end. Our heart recognizes it, but the language of Pinocchio, even when he's hanging from that tree, oh, Papa, Papa,
Yeah.
if only you were here. It's just evocative of that cry from Jesus on the cross.
Right.
My God, why have you forsaken me? And so, the children knew the story had to go on, and the publisher approaches Collodi and says, the story's not over. The kids are writing letters. They want to see Pinocchio again. And Collodi's like, what am I supposed to do? And the newspaper editor says, you've got to resurrect him. It really is the cry of the human heart.
It's so great that the kids led on this, right? And again, if you read this is Good Friday. I mean, after "Oh Papa, Papa, if only you were here," Collodi writes, "His breath failed him, and he could say no more. He shut his eyes, opened his mouth, stretched his legs, gave a long shudder, and hung stiff and insensible." And I'm reading this, and I'm like, this is brutal. And yet I'm like, okay, this could be in keeping with a lot of the Grimm's fairy tales where someone is eaten and that's all there is to it. But it is something where I had, like you all had, this sense that, well, I know I've got a lot of book left to read, so that goes on, but I also know that I don't want it to end here. It can't. This is unjust. This is leaving us in darkness. It flirts with nihilism. It was all meaningless to begin with. It's meaningless in the end, and yet we know that's not the case. Fascinating.
And that's what Collodi was struggling with himself his whole life. That sense of meaningless. Where do I find meaning? Where is the resurrection going to happen? I mean, this is what he was looking for. And, G.K. Chesterton said once, and I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but basically, fairy tales don't tell kids that evil exists. They already know that. Mm-hmm. What a fairy tale does for a child is show them the dragon, show them that the dragon can be defeated.
Right.
That evil doesn't have the last word. And now I think we are in this culture where, gosh, we can't, everything has to be so safe for our kids. Don't ever bring up anything bad that could ever happen. It's like, this is something false that we need to stop because it's not real. We know that there's evil. We know that people die. We know that people run amok with their passions. Like, we have to confront this reality face to face, these hard truths face to face, and look for what is it that actually conquers, what conquers the evil, and not be afraid to look for it.
Colleen, this reminds me of one of the movie versions. The parents were up in arms because there was smoking and drinking with these teenagers with Pinocchio in the movie, and it references that quote by Flannery O'Connor where she said they had their handle on the wrong horror. Like, the horror that we need to get a handle on is not living the truth of our life. Not being awakened every day and saying, yes, again, Jesus, I want to live the truth of my life, which is you. And what do you have? What on this human journey is mine to do for the kingdom of God with my brothers and sisters? So that's the true horror, is missing out on what we're doing here.
Exactly. That was the remake of the Disney version that they came out with a few years ago. And they eliminated all these scenes, from the land of boobies, all the scenes of kids drinking and smoking, like that was the worst thing that they could show. It's like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
That's not the worst thing you could show. The worst thing to show is not to understand what your freedom is for.
Right.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right.
Hi, I'm Tod Worner, Managing Editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members. It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture. Segment 3, The Theology of Pinocchio. Some of the first words out of Pinocchio's mouth, according to Franco Nembrini in Wiseblood Books and Well-Read Mom's edition of Pinocchio, when he finds Geppetto, are truly extraordinary. Yes, yes, I am Pinocchio, really Pinocchio, and you have quite forgiven me, have you not? The summary of our great need, of the great question we carry from the moment we get up in the morning is this: is there someone who can forgive me? Is there anyone who would give their life for me right now without asking me to change? And this is how God reveals himself to be God. So this edition of Pinocchio that you published with Wiseblood Books and Well-Read Mom, it's so rich in theological and philosophical meaning. Again, you've said Collodi was not, it sounds like, I think in the book you described him as a secularist, but actually was more closer to God than we may know, and even maybe kind of a believer himself. But I want to ask you, what has happened over the last 140 years as the story of Pinocchio has sort of been sanitized or rinsed of its theological underpinnings?
I think people want to do what they want to do, and they want Pinocchio to kind of be their story, their champion. And so they're rewriting this story of history according to their own ideology. I think that's what Del Toro was doing when he said, I want everyone to change except Pinocchio. Well, in doing that, he has literally rewritten this story, because those aren't the words. And he has to then impose something of his own interpretation upon this story instead of what actually happens.
Yeah.
The Disney version too, all of this stuff about wishing upon a star, and it's not just wishing upon a star. It's not some abstraction outside of yourself. Actually, when Pinocchio is reunited with his father, I mean, it's this great moment of two stories coming together, right? The story of the Good Shepherd and the prodigal son. Mm-hmm. The Good Shepherd leaves everything behind and goes in search of his son, which Geppetto does. And then he gets swallowed up by the whale and the dogfish, and he's in the belly of the whale, and he's waiting for nothing, because at that point, all looks lost. Yeah. And when Pinocchio actually discovers him there and confesses, that's not a lot of stories end there. Roberto Benigni's film version of Pinocchio is the most accurate, because it doesn't end with this beautiful reconciliation of the father and son. It actually shows the prodigal son story the day after, which is our life, the day after. Wow. What does Pinocchio do? He figures out a way to, with his reason now, he's commandeered his reason for the good. He finds a way out of the whale using his reason. He puts his father on his back, much like Aeneas walking out of burning Rome or Troy, carries his father on his back to the shores, finds a structure of a house, and starts working. Yeah. For the first time in his life, starts working. So it's the work of the human being that sanctifies us, that corrects us, that helps us stay in front of reality. He has finally learned how to sacrifice himself for another. And that's what he was missing all along. And that's what Christ invites us into is, gosh, your life can be like this. You can live like me. You can sacrifice like me. You can pour yourself out. And that's what Pinocchio does, is the pouring out. He nurses his father back to health. And I just love the way that this story shows that process of the day after the prodigal son.
If I want to interject something, and Marcie, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. But this is something that I thought was brilliant about this story is you see Pinocchio, he has this ultimate renewal of himself, if you will, just like you said, the day after for the prodigal son. But what was interesting is along the way, and I think about this with my own children, of course, I'm glad to say they're not doing all the Pinocchio's doing, but there is a certain reforming by inches along the way too. You know, when the boys go out to see the dogfish on the beach, they're kind of skipping school. And then one of the kids get hit in the head with a book. He goes down. He's unconscious. All the other kids flee, and there's Pinocchio saying, "I need to see that he's okay." Well, the old Pinocchio would have been gone in a heartbeat. So there are these moments where it seems like even in the dogfish, he's giving hope. Where the tuna fish is saying, you know, we're just going to be digested and that's going to be the end of it all. It just seems along the way, as opposed to he's bad, and all of a sudden lightning bolt, he's knocked off his horse and he's good. It seems like there's a reform by inches with an ultimate reformation, if you will, or a renewal in the end. Is that, Marcie, is that a fair understanding of this?
Oh, I think it is. You know, we see him change. We see him grow. We see transformation in his life. And we see him learn, as Father Giussani said, the law of life is the gift of self. Yeah. We see him learn to take steps in that direction. And I think that what we're bringing back here is a correction to the words that we've been using culturally, that we're completely using in the wrong way, like freedom. Culturally, we say, and we all would say it, you know, we all recognize freedom is doing what I want.
Yeah.
That's the modern definition of freedom. And it is not what freedom is. Freedom is not a lack of all bonds, freedom is not individualism. Freedom is in communion. And freedom is in relationships. And then, you know, there's nothing more thrilling than working in the kingdom of God with brothers and sisters. And, you know, like the strength to do this deep dive interview with you, Tod, which is such an honor, by the way. But it's like, oh, well, Colleen will be with me and Todd's my friend and it's going to be okay. Lord, you're with us. And this is for you, you know?
Yeah.
So freedom doesn't mean not depending on anyone else. Freedom, we belong to one another.
Yeah.
I love taking back words and living them in a new way. Reason. And reason isn't without the mystery of God, without faith. Reason includes reason. I'm not a theologian, but, you know, faith is part of our reason.
Yes.
And that's what the land of boobies is all about. He actually finds when he takes that to the extreme, I will do what I want all the time, all day long. He's actually turned into a beast. He actually has lost his resemblance the way that Geppetto made him. And we need to really hear this and let it transform our own hearts. Let's not diminish our likeness by misusing freedom. You know, Nembrini says, if you say no to any form of responsibility, work, and sacrifice, you will be more free, right? Yeah. That's the temptation. That's the great temptation. And it's actually in almost being drowned in waters with a noose around your neck, a weight around your neck, that at the point of death again, how many times does it take Pinocchio to learn that what is bringing you out of death is actually an awakening of what true freedom is, which is choose good, love, and pour yourself out.
Yeah, yeah.
And also, Tod, I think culturally, a lot of people who have left the church see the church as a place of rules. And I was at a family wedding not long ago, and I ran into a cousin who's left the church. He hates the church. And we had a 3-hour conversation, and he was saying, well, yeah, you Lewandowski girls, that's my maiden name. He said, you're all in the church. You bought it hook, line, and sinker, all these rules, and you just follow every rule. And he started laughing at me, like mocking me. And he said, I'm not going to be that way. I'm going to do what I want. And I said, Danny, you're saying this about me. And I really could say it with love, because I left the church once myself for several years. So I understand leaving. And I said, Danny, I know that's what you think, but I'm going to tell you what you're saying about me, that I'm just following rules. And I'm going to tell you that is not my experience.
Yeah.
And that is not what the church is for me. The church is my life. I mean, I don't go there because of a rule. I go there for life. And I realized, just like, wow, I've changed. I'm changing, in this, when we recognize steps in our own conversion, from rules to living in this mercy of God. And I did an interview with Franco Nembrini recently, and we got to talking. It was hard because he doesn't speak English, so there's this awkward translation space of time where you're waiting and trying to understand what they're saying, and with the translator. But we had this moment where I realized that I often go to a place of shame when I sin again, and that there's that place of mercy where you receive again this joy of really who you are, this recognizing again who you are and whose you are. And back to the story of Pinocchio, and for anyone who's left the church, it's like, sometimes we think we know what the church is, and we don't understand that it's really about living a life of joy and being alive.
That's so well said. And I really appreciate that sensitive story you told, Marcie. You made me think about the story where Chesterton was being criticized by a fellow novelist, a secular-minded novelist, who said Chesterton will never be great because he's a dogmatist. He's beholden to the rules of the Catholic Church. And Chesterton, is this classically puckish and winsome way, laughed it off and said, there are two types of people in the world: those who have a dogma and know it, and those who have a dogma and don't know it. And I happen to belong to the former, and my friend here belongs to the latter. Everybody has a dogma, and even your I think it was, you said your nephew or your cousin, has a dogma. And the issue is, are they just open-eyed enough to acknowledge, I'm following this other dogma that unfortunately leads you to a place of darkness, to a place of decadence, and maybe a place of nihilism where the Catholic Church is bringing you to the fullness of life. And so that's a wonderful, it's a sad story, but also it's a story of hope, because the world is filled with people whose prodigal son stories end in the arms of their father. So we'll pray for him. I wanted to ask you, as I know we're running short on time, but I want to be respectful of where you need to be today. Over the course of 36 chapters, we see the formation of Pinocchio, albeit in fits and starts, as creatures created with God-given dignity, tainted by original sin, muddied by entrenched fallibility, but hopeful in our Christ-assured grace. Isn't Pinocchio, and I think you've both said this already, but isn't Pinocchio's story our story? And too often, like Pinocchio, don't we neglect God our Father, misunderstand our church, and abuse our conscience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We need stories to help us see ourselves better. And this is what Pinocchio offers us, is a chance to really reflect on, where am I following pleasure and glory and honor for my sake? Where am I following this in life, and what is it leading to? And what are the ways kind of out of that, back from the self to love?
Yeah.
And So this really is a story for us, a story to keep informing our conscience. The church is there to help keep guiding us, keep pushing us, keep saying, you can be real. Your life is a great mystery and gift. And like what you were sharing, Marcie, the church isn't following rules. It's a place of awakening an infinite desire where you meet an infinite, your infinite desire meets the infinite.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where,
yeah.
and this is, they're on the shore, they're swimming back in the ocean of infinitude, away from the oil, and they get to the shore. They get to something concrete on which to build their life again. And this is how Pinocchio ends. So this is the moment for us. We have the sea above us, below us. We have the sky above us, but we also have our little place, our little shore where we, with our changed hearts, can actually change the world through our work, through our love.
And there are rules to follow, but the difference that Pinocchio learns is that those rules are for him to live and thrive.
Yeah.
Like, they're not against him, they're for him. And so you can attach yourself to those kind of things with a joy and a trust and a certainty that they're for you.
Well, it's sort of like this. I mean, we all understand the notion of athletic excellence, academic excellence, musical excellence requires sacrifice, requires delayed gratification, requires discipline, requires certain rules of life. But somehow people argue that the same doesn't apply to spiritual excellence. And to my way of thinking, again, like you said, the framework, the scaffolding, the guardrails on the multi-lane road are there to get you to your destination, which is richness and fullness and arrival at anything but the counterfeits the world is offering you. It's arriving into the arms of God, into the glory of Christ. And so, what you've said is spot on. I want to ask each of you two last questions. How have you each been changed by your encounter with Pinocchio and the publication of this book?
Well, the publication of this book was not easy. I mean, you cannot believe what all the hoops we've gone through to kind of bring this thing. It's more than it's an episode in itself, right,
Sure.
Colleen? Thanks to some supporters from Milwaukee who helped us out. Thanks to lots of people along the way, but I've been changed by it because again, it's something. It's been worth the effort for myself, and I want my grandkids to read this. I want my sons to read this, and I think they will. My husband's reading it now, and because we have this sort of mantra that when women read more and read well, there's this ripple effect.
Yeah,
and more people. These books are around the house, or you're handing them out, so I long for a cultural reawakening. And I do believe this vacuum that we've created in the imagination, this is a low-hanging fruit for evangelization, like educating the imagination to our religious sense, to our longing, our true purpose. It's exciting to be part of bringing this, and I thank you for having us, Todd, because it's been a delight to be awakened again.
Yeah, and for me, it has been. I mean, Marcie and I's friendship is one of deep providence. I really believe God brought us together many years ago, 13 years ago now. A whole nother story about how we met and how we kind of started this whole process, but it's been such a joy to work on this project in particular. The full title, Pinocchio with Reflections on a Father's Love by Franco Nembrini, is available for sale through Word Among Us, which is important. Well Read Mom took a big financial risk in actually bringing this book into print. At the time, we wanted a really beautiful edition of Pinocchio, and that meant we had to print 10,000 copies for our women. So we really want, other people to experience this outside of Well-Read Mom as well. But for me, I think one of the ways I've been really changed by Pinocchio is to see that every moment of life has an opportunity for me to live more deeply. And I shared this experience with you, Marcie. I was telling you about this, but there was a really busy work week, and I came home from the Well-Read Mom conference in Milwaukee, and our whole basement was flooded. Oh. And so we had to rip up the floor and whatever. So the next day, my husband goes to work, and I'm sitting down. I had just made a cup of coffee, and I'm sitting down, and my kids are screaming at me, "Mom, there's more water coming out of the basement." And I go down in the basement, and our foundation has this little pinhole crack, and it's literally pouring water all into our basement from another area. So there I am in my Sunday clothes, and I'm mopping up all this dirt and muck and goo coming out of our foundation wall. And I come back up, and I was just feeling really bitter, this long week, basement water heater goes out, now our foundation, what the heck is going on? And I decided at that moment to sit down and to read. And Pinocchio was right by my chair. And I decided, okay, I'm going to pick this up. And it has happened so many times to me. I feel like God really speaks to me directly through literature. And I think, Todd, you've had this experience I see in the back all your books there, but God really speaking to us through the human story, through words. And I picked up chapter 7, and I read Franco Nembrini's notes that said, "The unexpected is our only hope. When nothing is working, when we've been wronged, when life wounds us to the point of robbing us of our awareness of the truth, and we wind up on a different path entirely, the solution is the same. Someone or something must intervene from outside to call us back and to remind us how things stand."
Wow.
The unexpected is our only hope. And at that moment, I sat there and I just thought, thank you, Lord.
Yes.
I have work to do. This is my little shore. I can mop this up. I can offer this for you. Thank you for bringing me out of my self-pity and false egoism of thinking, another problem for me to solve. No. You've been given everything. You have a home. Do your work. Do it well. And I just keep thinking of that. The unexpected is our hope. And I thank Pinocchio. I see him in my mind now when I want to abandon my work for some little fledgling pleasure. I think Pinocchio.
Yes.
What would you do? And it always brings me back to wanting to love more deeply, especially those that are right in front of me.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I want to end with a parting thought by Franco Nembrini from, again, Pinocchio. This is published by Wiseblood Books and Well-Read Mom. One last thought, returning to the word Collodi uses to end his tale. Well-behaved. In Italian, per bene. Again, this is not the well-behaved of the rule followers, as though Pinocchio has been well-trained not to put his finger up his nose or speak with his mouth full. Let us consider the original Italian term in its etymological meaning. A little boy who is per bene is per il bene, that is, for the good. The whole substance of the story is contained in this one little word, to discover that we are made for the good, made, that is, for truth, for beauty, and to want what is good for ourselves, for others, and for the world. And finally, to discover that this is all possible. It really is possible to feel that everything is great, everything is positive, everything is made for us. This is Pinocchio's challenge for us. Marcie and Colleen, any final closing words that you'd give to our listeners about Pinocchio and your experience with him?
Well, the Italians, when they say "I love you," they say "voglio ti bene," they say, I want your good. And I think that's, they don't say, I love you.
Yeah.
They say, I want your good. Voglio ti bene. And I think this is that deep sense of goodness. I want for you all of the best things. That's what Pinocchio offers us.
And I guess my final thoughts of gratitude for this book is recognizing that everything is given and we have a Father.
Marcie Stokman and Colleen Hutt, Catholics, well-read moms, and champions of the well-told story. Thank you. It has been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you so much, Todd.
So I've been thinking, who doesn't remember the childhood story of Pinocchio? The wooden boy who runs afoul of his father and creator, Geppetto, with repeated mischief-making and lying that leads to abject desperation and an ever-enlarging nose. And yet, notwithstanding his deviation from the virtuous path, Pinocchio finds his way home. In my mind's eye, it was the Disney rendition that taught the lesson of telling the truth and avoiding waywardness. It was an entertaining lark, but little more than that. But that was until I read Wiseblood Books and Well-Read Mom's rendition of Carlo Collodi's original story, Pinocchio, accompanied chapter by chapter by the reflections of Franco Nembrini. Encountering the original and profoundly raw version of Pinocchio was not only edifying, it was jarring. The Pinocchio we encounter in his original form is petulant, self-absorbed, and intractably devious. In all honesty, my blood boiled when I read the repeated dark offenses of this misanthropic wooden boy. I simply did not like him. Juxtaposed against Pinocchio's thoughtless, heedless sensibility is the utter selflessness of his father Geppetto, a man who would and did give the very coat off his back for the well-being of his son. Having watched this story, the Disney version to be sure, as a boy, I had little sympathy for the spinning moral compass of this wooden boy. I also wondered at the limits Geppetto would go to for such a little monster. But reading this story again as a father of two daughters, I've come to see things differently. I came to realize how much pain I would be willing to endure, how much hardship I would be willing to handle, how much misery I could accept on behalf of my children, all in earnest desire and undying effort to bring them back home. Whatever it would take, whatever horrors to be endured, whatever lengths I would have to go to, I would exceed. Franco Nembrini tells a story about meeting a man imprisoned for violent crimes who converted to Christianity. Noticing the INRI posted on the crucifix above Christ's head, he was unaware that the letters stood for Jesus Nazarenus Rex Iudeorum, which is Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, an ironic but eerily honest posting by Pontius Pilate intended to rankle the unbelieving sensibilities of the disdainful Pharisees. Instead, the prisoner assumed that given that Christ sacrificed himself brutally on our behalf, INRI must stand for Io non ritorno indietro, I do not turn back. The prisoner was more right than he knew. God does not turn back. Carlo Collodi's Pinocchio is the parable of the prodigal son told anew. Upon hearing the parable again this Lent, I discovered something I hadn't heard before. When the lousy, greedy, ungrateful son encountered famine and profound hardship, he traveled home to his father, not only to ask for a handout, but to offer his deepest of apologies. As his steps drew him closer to home, he nervously rehearsed his lines of contrition. And yet before he could even utter the words he intended to recite, his father ran unreservedly and embraced his son. Before his son could even apologize, his father's love swallowed him whole. This is how God loves you and how God loves me. Christ Almighty, how did we ever deserve you? And one last thing. To be sure, read Wiseblood Books and Well-Read Mom's Pinocchio, but also open up Grimm's fairy tales, stories you haven't encountered since you were a child, or perhaps since you read them to your own children and grandchildren, and encounter the imaginative tales anew. Let the narrative wash over you and the moral of the story penetrate to the deepest recesses of your soul. In so doing, you will realize how beautiful, instructive, and indispensable these stories are in crafting the moral compass by which our lives are directed. Become young in your reading, and in so doing, become old in your wisdom. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization Culture Podcast. I'm Tod Worner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.